Pick it up!
The crystal goblet shattered against the marble floor, red wine bleeding across the white stone like a fresh wound. Pick it up. Dowager Duchess Yevdokia didn't raise her voice. She never had to. 3 girls before this one had wept at that tone. 3 girls the Duke Lavrenti had brought home. 3 girls sent away in carriages with swollen eyes and ruined names. But the girl standing in the doorway of the Vorontsov estate did not weep. She did not even blink. Slowly, almost lazily, Zlata Mirinova stepped over the broken glass, the hem of her travel-stained gown brushing the wine without care. She walked the full length of the drawing room, past the gasping servants, past the Duke himself, and stopped one breath away from the most feared woman in the empire. Then she smiled.
Your Grace, I think you've mistaken me for the others.
The dowager's hand twitched toward her cane. The Duke went pale, and somewhere upstairs a clock began to chime midnight, the hour. The servants would later whisper that the war truly began. Who is this girl who walked into the lion's den without flinching? Why does the Duke look at her as though he's seen a ghost? And what secret is Zlata carrying beneath that wine-soaked hem? A secret the Dowager Duchess would kill to keep buried. If you want to know what happens when the cruelest woman in the empire finally meets a girl who refuses to break, subscribe to the channel right now, tap that bell, and don't you dare miss part 2. Trust me, my loves, you have never seen a mother-in-law lose a war quite like this one. Stay with me. The story is only just beginning. The clock was still chiming when Zlata Mirinova lowered her eyes, just enough to look modest, not enough to look afraid. She had practiced that exact tilt of the chin in a cracked mirror back home, over and over, until it felt as natural as breathing. A woman could survive a great deal in this empire, her grandmother used to say, if she learned the difference between bowing and breaking. Zlata had learned both. 3 weeks earlier, she had been kneeling in the frozen garden behind her father's crumbling estate, digging up the last of the winter beets with bare red hands. The Mironov name had once meant something. Now it meant a leaking roof, a sick younger sister coughing through the nights, and a father who drank to forget the medals he no longer wore. Zlata was 22, unmarried, and quietly terrified that one more bad harvest would finish them all. Then the letter had come. No, not a letter, she reminded herself sharply. A summons, a messenger on a black horse, a wax seal she did not recognize, and a single line of instruction. Be ready by Thursday. A carriage will come. Speak of this to no one. She had not spoken of it, not to her father, who would have forbidden it, not to her sister Praskovia, who would have cried. She had simply packed one trunk, kissed Praskovia's hot forehead in the dark, and waited at the gate in the freezing dawn until the carriage rolled out of the mist, like something from a dream she had not asked for. She did not know then who had sent for her. She only knew that the seal on the door had been a wolf, and that wolves in this country meant only one family, Vorontsov. The drawing room smelled of beeswax and old roses now, and the Dowager Duchess Yevdokia was still staring at her. Zlata could feel the weight of that stare on her skin like cold water. The old woman was smaller than the stories made her sound. Smaller, and somehow worse. Her hair was silver white, pinned so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes, and her mouth was a thin line that had clearly forgotten how to smile decades ago. She wore black. Of course she wore black. The dowager had been in mourning for her husband for 19 years, and the servants whispered she enjoyed it. You stepped on my floor, the dowager said quietly, with wine on your shoes. I did, your grace. You did not apologize. No, your grace. The silence that followed was the kind that made the candles seem to flicker on purpose. Behind her, Zlata could hear the Duke breathing. He had not said a single word since she crossed the threshold. She had not yet allowed herself to look at him properly. This man she was meant to marry, this stranger whose mother destroyed girls for sport. She had only seen him once, in passing, 2 summers ago, at a regimental parade in the capital. He had been laughing then. He was not laughing now. Lavrenti, the dowager said, without turning her head. Where did you find this one? The Duke cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was low and careful. The voice of a man walking across thin ice in winter boots. Mother, she is the daughter of Colonel Mirinov. You remember the colonel, father spoke of him often. Your father spoke of many men. He spoke of this one with respect. Something shifted, very slightly, in the dowager's face. Not warmth, nothing so generous, but a sharpening, the way a knife sharpens when it remembers what it was made for. Zlata kept her eyes on the floor and counted her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She had been told by the man who delivered the summons that she would have one chance to make an impression, just one. After that, the household would decide whether she lived in the East Wing or was sent home in disgrace before the wedding banns were ever read. She had already decided she was not going home. Praskovia needed medicine, her father needed bread, and somewhere in this house, she suspected, there was a reason a duke of the Vorontsov line had sent for a half-ruined colonel's daughter instead of one of the polished young ladies of the capital. Men like Lavrenti did not marry down without a reason. Zlata did not yet know what that reason was, but she would learn it. She would learn all of it. Look at me, girl. Zlata lifted her chin. The dowager studied her for a long moment, the way one might study a horse before deciding whether to buy it or shoot it. Then, slowly, she reached for the small silver bell on the table beside her chair and rang it once. A side door opened. A thin, dark-haired woman in a housekeeper's uniform stepped in, eyes lowered, hands folded. The dowager did not look at her. Akalina, take Miss Mirinova to the green room. Not the blue one, the green. The housekeeper hesitated. It was the smallest hesitation, less than a breath, but Zlata caught it, and she saw the Duke catch it too. Something passed between him and the housekeeper, something old and unspoken, and then Akalina bowed her head and murmured, "Yes, Your Grace." And Akalina, the dowager added, almost gently, "Do remind her about the portrait." "Yes, Your Grace." Zlata followed the housekeeper out of the drawing room without looking back. The corridor beyond was longer than it had any right to be, lined with dark wood and darker paintings, and the air felt colder with every step. Akalina did not speak. Her shoulders were stiff under the plain wool of her dress, and once, just once, she glanced sideways at Zlata, as if she wanted to say something, and had decided, painfully, not to. The green room was at the end of the east corridor. It was beautiful in the way old wounds are beautiful, all faded silk and tarnished gold, with a wide bed draped in moss-colored velvet, and tall windows that looked out onto the black garden. A fire had been lit. Someone had laid out a nightgown. Everything was in perfect order. Almost everything. Above the fireplace, in a heavy gilt frame, hung the portrait of a young woman. She was perhaps Zlata's own age. Pale, dark-eyed, with a small private smile, as if the painter had told her a joke just before the brush touched the canvas. Her gown was the color of fresh cream, and there was a string of pearls at her throat that Zlata recognized at once, because the Dowager Duchess had been wearing those same pearls downstairs. Zlata's mouth went dry. "Akalina," she said softly, "who is this?" The housekeeper was already at the door. She paused there, one hand on the frame, and did not turn around. "The first one, miss." "The first what?" Akalina's voice was barely a whisper. "The first girl the Duke brought home. Sleep well, Miss Mirinova. And please, do not open the door, no matter what you hear tonight." The door clicked shut, and somewhere, very far away in the great dark house, a woman began to weep. Zlata did not move for a long time after the door closed. The weeping had stopped almost as quickly as it began, swallowed somewhere into the bones of the house, and now there was only the slow crackle of the fire and the sound of her own breath, too loud in her own ears. She looked at the portrait again, the first one. The girl in the cream gown smiled down at her with that small secret smile, and Zlata understood, very suddenly, that she was not looking at a bride, she was looking at a warning. Whoever this girl had been, whatever she had hoped for when she first walked into this house, she was gone now, gone in a way nobody spoke of out loud, and the Dowager Duchess wore her pearls to dinner. Zlata sat down on the edge of the bed because her legs would not hold her any more. She had known, coming here, that the Vorontsov household was dangerous. She had known the stories. 3 girls sent away weeping, the servants whispered, but Zlata had been a soldier's daughter long enough to know that whispers always softened the truth. 3 girls sent away, maybe. Or maybe 3 girls who had never left this house at all. She pressed her palms flat against the velvet coverlet and made herself breathe. In, out, in again. Her grandmother's voice came back to her, dry and patient. Fear is a horse, Zlatochka. You ride it, or it rides you. Choose now. She chose. She rose, walked quietly to the door, and tried the handle. It turned. That, somehow, frightened her more than a locked door would have. A locked door meant a prisoner. An unlocked door meant the household was not afraid of her running, because there was nowhere in this house she could run to. She eased the door open just enough to see into the corridor. A single candle burned at the far end, near the staircase. Beneath it, half in shadow, the Duke Lavrenti stood with his back to her, one hand braced against the wall. His shoulders were shaking. For a moment, foolishly, she thought he was laughing. Then she heard the small broken sound he made, the sound of a grown man trying very hard not to fall apart, and she understood he was not laughing at all. She should have closed the door. Any sensible girl would have closed the door. Instead, Zlata stepped into the corridor in her bare feet and walked toward him. He heard her before she reached him. His head came up sharply, and when he turned, his face was wet, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had not slept properly in a very long time. He did not look like a duke in that moment. He looked like a boy who had been caught doing something he was not supposed to do. "You should not be out here," he said. "I know. My mother will hear of it by morning. I know that too." He stared at her. She stared back. The candle between them guttered in some draught she could not feel, and for a strange, weightless second, Zlata thought he might actually tell her the truth. All of it, right there in the dark. The portrait, the weeping, whatever he had done, or failed to do, that made him stand alone in corridors at night and cry into the wallpaper. Then his face closed. "Go back to your room, Miss Mirinova." Who was she? Go back to your room. The girl in the portrait. Who was she? His jaw tightened. She was my wife. The word landed in Zlata's chest like a stone dropped into a deep well. Wife, not betrothed, not almost. Wife. She had been told, very clearly, by the messenger and by her own father's old friend in the capital, that the Duke Lavrenti Vorontsov was unmarried, that he was searching for a bride, that the household was in want of a duchess. She had been told a great many things, and now she understood that almost none of them were true. "You are a widower," she said slowly. "No." "Then where is she?" He did not answer. He only looked at her, and his silence was an answer in itself, the kind of answer that crawled under the skin and stayed there. Somewhere above them a door creaked. Lavrenti flinched as if he had been struck. "Go!" he whispered. "Please. If she finds you here, she will start with you tonight, and I cannot do it again, not so soon." "Start what?" "Go." Zlata went. She did not run, because running in this house felt like a thing the walls would remember. But she walked very quickly, and she did not look back until she was inside the green room, with the door shut and her forehead pressed against the cool wood. Her hands were trembling. She did not know yet that on the small writing desk by the window, beneath a folded square of linen, someone had already left her a small silver knife, and a single word scratched into the wood beneath it. Run. But Zlata Mirinova, soldier's daughter, half ruined and entirely out of choices, had already decided, somewhere between the corridor and this door, that she was not going to run from anything in this house. Not from the Duke, not from his secret, and not, God help her, from the woman downstairs who collected pearls from dead girls. She would stay, she would learn, and whatever this house had done to the others, she swore softly to the dark, it would not do to her. Outside, in the black garden, a single horse whinnied at the gate. Someone had just arrived. Zlata heard the gate before she saw anything. The iron groaned open, hooves struck gravel, and a man's voice called out something short and impatient in the dark. She crossed quickly to the window and pressed herself against the heavy curtain. 2 riders, one in a long traveling cloak, one smaller, hooded, sitting very still in the saddle. A stable boy ran out with a lantern, and for the briefest moment the light caught the smaller rider's face. A woman, young, pale as paper. Then the hood went back up, and they were both led around the side of the house, toward an entrance Zlata could not see from her window. She stood there for a long time after they had gone, her breath fogging the cold glass. A new arrival in the middle of the night. A woman, brought in through the servants' door. In a house where the first wife had vanished and 3 other girls had been sent away weeping. Zlata did not know what any of it meant yet, but she felt it the way her father used to say he could feel a battle before the first cannon fired, a low pressure behind the ribs, a knowing. She turned back to the writing desk, lifted the folded square of linen, and looked at the silver knife again, small, plain, sharp, the kind a woman might hide in a sleeve. The words scratched beneath it had been done in a hurry, the letters uneven, the wood splintered at the edges. Run. Zlata picked up the knife. She did not run. She slid it carefully into the inner pocket of her travel gown, where her grandmother had once kept her prayer beads, and she sat down by the dying fire to think. By morning, she had a plan, a small one, the kind of plan a soldier's daughter makes when she does not yet know the size of the battlefield. She would learn this house, every room, every servant, every silence. She would smile at the dowager. She would not ask the Duke any more questions in dark corridors, and she would find out, by any means available to her, who the woman in the hood had been. She did not have to wait long for her chance. At breakfast the dowager did not appear. A silver tray was sent up to her rooms instead, and the long dining hall was empty except for Zlata and the Duke, sitting at opposite ends of a table so long that conversation across it would have required shouting. Lavrenti did not shout. He did not even look up. He cut his bread into small, precise squares and ate them one at a time, like a man performing a duty. Zlata ate slowly and watched him. In the daylight he was younger than she had thought last night, perhaps 30, with dark hair cut shorter than the fashion, and a small white scar running through his left eyebrow. He was handsome in a tired, unfinished way. He had not slept. She was almost certain of it. "Your Grace," she said, when the servants had withdrawn for a moment, "may I walk in the gardens after breakfast?" He looked up at last. His eyes were the gray of river stones. "The gardens are not safe in winter. I have walked in worse." A small flicker, almost a smile, crossed his mouth and died there. "Then walk, Miss Mirinova. But stay on the gravel paths. Do not go past the chapel." "What is past the chapel?" "Gravel paths," he repeated quietly. "Only the gravel paths." She inclined her head and said nothing more. The gardens were enormous. Frozen fountains, black hedges shaped into beasts, statues of saints with their faces worn smooth by 100 winters. Zlata walked with her hands folded inside her sleeves, and her eyes everywhere. She counted windows. She counted doors. She memorized which chimneys were smoking and which were cold, because cold chimneys meant unused rooms, and unused rooms in a house like this were never truly empty. The chapel sat at the far end of the east garden, small and white, with a single bell in its little tower. Beyond it the gravel path ended, and a narrower dirt path began, winding down through a stand of bare birches toward something Zlata could not quite see. A low building, a roof, smoke. She stood at the edge of the chapel for a long moment, listening. Behind her, a twig snapped. She turned, the silver knife already half in her hand inside her sleeve, and found herself face to face with Akalina. The housekeeper had come out without a cloak. Her arms were bare and red from the cold, and her dark eyes were very wide. "You should not be here, miss. The Duke said the gravel paths were safe." "The Duke says many things." Akalina's voice was almost a whisper. "Come away, please, before someone sees." "Akalina," Zlata kept her voice gentle. "Who is in that building?" The housekeeper's face did something complicated. She looked down at her own bare hands, as if she did not recognize them. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, gone thinner, gone older. "My sister, miss. Your sister. She was the second one." Zlata felt the cold of the morning settle into her bones in a new way. The second one. The second girl the Duke had brought home, not sent away. Not weeping in a carriage, living, apparently, in a small building at the end of a dirt path, behind a chapel, in a part of the garden the Duke had warned her not to enter. What was done to her? Akalina shook her head once, sharply. "Not here, miss. Not in the open. If you wish to know, come to the kitchens after the Dowager takes her afternoon medicine. 3 o'clock. Through the servants' stair. Tell no one, not even him." Her eyes flicked back toward the house, especially not him. She turned and walked quickly back toward the kitchens before Zlata could answer. Zlata stood alone by the chapel for another minute, her breath rising in pale clouds. Then she walked back the way she had come, slowly, on the gravel paths, exactly as she had been told. That afternoon she did exactly as she had been told to do that too. The servant's stair was narrow, and smelled of cabbage and old wax. Akalina was waiting at the bottom with a cup of tea she did not offer to drink. She led Zlata through a small pantry into a tiny windowless room with a single chair and a single candle. She shut the door. She did not sit down. "My sister Tanya was 16 when the Duke married her in secret," she said. There was no preamble. There was no time for one. His mother did not know. When she found out, she did not scream. She did not throw anything. She simply began. Small things first. Salt in the tea. A loose stair. A horse that bolted. Tanya lost the child in the 5th month. After that, she lost her wits. The Duke could not send her away because she was still his wife in the eyes of God, and he could not keep her in the house because his mother would have finished her. So he built the cottage. He visits her on Sundays. He thinks no one knows. Zlata could not speak for a moment. "And the first one," she said finally. "The girl in the portrait." Akalina's eyes were very dark. "The first one was the Dowager's choice, miss, not the Duke's. He loved her like a sister. She died in childbirth before the Duke ever touched her, and the child died with her, and the Dowager has never forgiven him for grieving a woman who was not her." She paused. "The pearls were the first ones. The Dowager wears them to remind him." Zlata sat down slowly in the single chair. "And the third girl?" "Sent home, miss. Truly sent home. She was clever. She left within the week." "And the woman who arrived last night?" Akalina's face went perfectly still. "That, miss," she said softly, "is the question I was hoping you could answer. Because she did not come from the Duke. She came from the Dowager. And she has been brought into the blue room, the one her Grace told me, very specifically, you were not to have." Somewhere above them, a bell began to ring for tea. Zlata climbed the servant's stair 2 steps at a time. Her heart was a hammer against her ribs, but her hands, she noticed with a strange cold satisfaction, were steady. Her grandmother had been right. Fear was a horse. She was riding it now. She did not go to the tea bell. She turned left at the top of the stair, away from the dining hall, and walked toward the blue room. The blue room was on the same corridor as her own, 3 doors down. She had passed it that morning without thinking. Now she stood outside it and listened. There were voices inside, low, a woman's voice, soft and pleading. Another woman's voice, older, slow, almost kind, the kind of kind that was worse than cruelty. The Dowager. Zlata held her breath and bent her ear to the wood. "Hush, child," the Dowager was saying. "Hush now. You did very well to come. The Duke does not yet know you are here. He will be so pleased." The younger voice answered in a language Zlata did not understand, French perhaps. The dowager answered in the same tongue, fluent, smooth, soothing. Then in Russian again, almost absently, as if to herself, "Such pretty hair, such a pretty little neck. You will do very nicely, my dove, very nicely indeed." Zlata's stomach turned. Footsteps inside, coming toward the door. She stepped back fast, gathered her skirts and walked away, as if she had every right to be in the corridor, as if she had only just come up from tea. She did not look back. She heard the door open behind her. She heard the dowager's slow, even breathing in the doorway. She felt the old woman's eyes on her spine like two cold fingers, and she did not turn. She did not turn until she had reached her own room and shut the door, and slid the silver knife out of her sleeve and laid it on the bed. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the door and tried to think. A new girl. Not a bride, not a guest. Something the dowager had ordered brought to the house in the dark, in secret, before the Duke could know. Pretty hair, a pretty little neck. You will do very nicely. The words crawled along Zlata's skin. She understood, then, what she had stumbled into. The Dowager Duchess Yevdokia was not simply cruel. She was not merely a bitter old woman tormenting her son's brides for sport. She was doing something planned, something that involved girls brought into this house, and never quite leaving it the way they came in. The first wife dead before the marriage was real. The second locked in a cottage with her wits gone, the third clever enough to run, and now a fourth, smuggled in through the servant's door at midnight, while the Duke wept alone in a corridor, because he already knew, God help him, he already knew what his mother was, and he could not stop her. Zlata pressed her hands to her face. For one long moment she let herself be afraid, truly afraid, not the controlled fear of the courtyard or the corridor, but the deep, animal fear of a young woman alone in a house full of locked doors. She thought of Praskovia coughing in the cold. She thought of her father sleeping in his chair with an empty bottle by his foot. She thought of the carriage that had brought her here, and how easily another carriage could take her away by morning, no questions asked, if she only walked downstairs and told the dowager she had changed her mind. The third girl had been clever. The third girl had left within the week. Zlata could be the fourth. She could go home. She sat with that thought for a long time. She let it warm her like a fire. She imagined the road back, the gates of her father's estate, Praskovia's thin arms around her neck. She let herself want it. Then she stood up. She picked up the silver knife, and she walked out of the green room and down the corridor and into the blue room without knocking. The dowager was sitting in a high-backed chair by the window. The girl, the new girl, was kneeling at her feet, with her head in the dowager's lap, half asleep, while the old woman stroked her hair. There was a cup of something on the table beside them. The room smelled faintly of almonds and something else, something bitter, something Zlata's grandmother had once warned her about in a tone Zlata had never forgotten. The dowager looked up. She did not look surprised. She did not look anything at all. "Miss Mirinova, Your Grace, you were not summoned." "No, Your Grace." The girl on the floor stirred, blinked, lifted her head. She was perhaps 17. Her eyes were already glassy. She smiled vaguely at Zlata, as if she were a pleasant dream, and let her head fall back into the dowager's lap. Zlata kept her voice perfectly even. "What are you giving her?" "A tonic, child. She is tired from her journey." "What is in the tonic?" The dowager's hand stilled in the girl's hair. For the first time since Zlata had entered this house, the old woman looked at her properly, not as a horse to be bought, not as a girl to be broken, as a problem. "You are a curious creature," the dowager said softly. "Your mother was curious also. I remember her. She died young, did she not?" "She did. A pity." "What is in the tonic, Your Grace?" The dowager smiled. It was a small, terrible smile, and it did not touch her eyes. "Sit down, Miss Mirinova. I think perhaps it is time we understood one another." Zlata did not sit. She moved instead, slowly, until she was standing between the dowager and the door, until the dowager would have to go through her to leave the room. The knife was a small, warm weight in her sleeve. "Send her away," Zlata said. "Send the girl back to wherever you brought her from, tonight, before the Duke knows she was ever in this house." "And why would I do that, child?" "Because if you do not," Zlata said quietly, "I will tell him. I will tell him tonight. I will tell him about the cottage behind the chapel, and the second wife inside it. I will tell him what you did to the first one. I will tell him what is in that cup, and then I will tell every magistrate from here to the capital, and I will use my father's name to do it. He is half a ruin, your grace, but he was a colonel once, and he still has friends, and you of all people know what a colonel's friends can do." The dowager was no longer smiling. "You would not survive the week. Neither would you." For a long moment nothing in the room moved. The fire crackled. The girl on the floor breathed slowly, slowly. Somewhere far below, a door opened, and a man's boots struck the marble. Lavrenti. Coming back from wherever he had gone, coming up the stairs. The dowager heard him too. Her eyes flickered, just once. And in that flicker Zlata saw something she had not expected to see. Not in this woman, not ever. She saw fear, small, quickly buried. But there, the dowager was afraid of her son. Zlata filed that away in the cold, quiet part of her mind that her grandmother had taught her to keep for important things. "Take the cup," the dowager said at last. Her voice was flat. "Take it and pour it into the fire. Take the girl to your own room. Lock the door. Do not let him see her tonight. In the morning I will arrange a carriage. She will be returned to her people with a sum of money and an explanation that will satisfy them. You will tell him nothing. Not tonight. Not ever. Do you understand me, Miss Mirinova?" "I understand you, your grace. And in return—" "In return," Zlata said, "I stay. I marry him. I become the Duchess of this house. And you, your grace, you do not touch another girl in it. Not ever again. Not one." The dowager looked at her for a very long time. "You think you have won something tonight, child?" "No, your grace. I think I have only just begun." The boots were on the landing now, close. Lavrenti's voice, calling for Akalina, calling for tea, calling for his mother. Zlata took the cup from the table. The almond smell was stronger now, and it made her eyes water. She crossed to the fire and poured it in. The flames hissed green for one short second and went back to gold. She turned to the girl on the floor and lifted her gently to her feet. The dowager was already standing, smoothing her black skirts, arranging her face into the expression of a tired old woman who had been napping by the fire. By the time the door opened, she was perfect again. By the time Lavrenti stepped into the room, she was smiling at him with the practiced sweetness of a mother who had nothing to hide. He did not see the girl. Zlata had already moved her behind the curtain by the window. "Mother," Lavrenti said. "Miss Mirinova, I did not expect to find you here together." "We were becoming acquainted, my son," the dowager said softly. "She is a remarkable young woman. I find I approve of her after all." Lavrenti looked from his mother's face to Zlata's. Something passed behind his eyes that Zlata could not read. Surprise, suspicion, and underneath both of those, very faint, very fragile, something that might have been hope. "I am glad to hear it, mother." "Yes," the dowager said, and her eyes met Zlata's across the room. "I believe she will suit this family very well." Outside the window in the black garden, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, and Zlata Mirinova, with another woman's drugged daughter swaying behind a curtain at her back, smiled at her future husband and wondered how long a peace bought with a threat could possibly last. The peace held for exactly 11 days, 11 days in which Zlata smiled at the breakfast table and walked the gravel paths in the afternoon and let the seamstresses pin a wedding gown around her ribs without once flinching at the pins. 11 days in which the dowager sat across from her in the drawing room and spoke politely of weather and church bells and the price of wheat in the southern provinces, while their eyes met over the tea service and said other things entirely. The girl from the blue room had gone home. Zlata had watched the carriage leave at dawn, with Akalina's quiet nephew on the box, and a small purse of silver tucked into the girl's coat pocket. She did not know yet that the girl had a name. Polina. She would learn it later, in a letter that arrived in spring, written in a careful schoolroom hand, thanking her for a life the girl did not entirely remember losing. Lavrenti noticed the change in the house before he understood it. He noticed that his mother no longer rang for Akalina at odd hours. He noticed that the cottage behind the chapel was being kept warmer now, that the doctor from the village had been sent for twice in 1 week. He noticed, most of all, that his bride-to-be no longer flinched when his mother entered a room. On the 8th night he came to her door. He did not knock. He scratched, very softly, the way a servant might. When Zlata opened it, he was standing in the corridor in his shirt sleeves, holding a single candle, looking like a man who had walked a long way to ask a question he was afraid of the answer to. "What did you do?" he said. "I made an arrangement." "With my mother?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long time. His riverstone eyes were very tired, and there was a small tremor at the corner of his mouth that she had not seen before. When he spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper. "Tanya, the cottage. You know." "I know. And you did not run." "No." He closed his eyes. He stood there in her doorway with his eyes closed and his candle shaking very slightly in his hand, and Zlata understood, watching him, that no one had ever simply stayed before, not for him, not knowing. The first wife had died before she could know, the second had lost her wits learning, the third had been wise enough to leave, and here was this fourth one, this colonel's daughter with mud on her hem and a silver knife in her sleeve, and she had looked the whole black truth of his house in the face, and she had stayed. "I cannot give you what a husband ought to give," he said. "I did not ask for it. My mother will outlive me. She will outlive us both. She is not finished." "I know that too." "Then why?" Zlata thought about it. She thought about Praskovia, who had received her first proper doctor that week, paid for out of the household accounts. Zlata had quietly begun to learn. She thought about her father, who had been sent a case of decent wine, and a polite letter, inviting him to visit in the spring. She thought about Akalina, who now slept with her door unlocked for the first time in 9 years. She thought about the green room, and the portrait above the fireplace, and the small private smile of a girl she had never met. "Because somebody has to," she said simply, "and it turns out it is me." He stayed in the doorway a moment longer. Then he bowed, very low, the way a soldier bows to a commanding officer, and he walked away down the corridor with his candle. And Zlata shut the door and leaned her forehead against the wood and let herself, for the first time since the carriage came, cry a little. The wedding was small. The dowager wore the pearls. Zlata smiled at her across the altar and felt nothing at all, which she had begun to understand was its own kind of strength. After the vows, the dowager kissed her on both cheeks and murmured, almost fondly, "You will be a magnificent duchess, my dear." And Zlata, kissing her back, murmured, "I learned from watching you, your grace." They both smiled. The household smiled. No one in the chapel that morning understood what had passed between them, and that, Zlata thought, was exactly as it should be. That night, Lavrenti slept in his own rooms. Zlata slept in hers. In the morning he came to her at breakfast and asked, quite formally, if she would care to ride out with him to the cottage. She said she would. They went together through the snow, and when they reached the small white door, he hesitated, and she took his gloved hand in hers and held it until he could lift it to knock. Tanya did not know him anymore. She had not known him for years. She sat by the fire in a clean white shawl and hummed a song from her childhood and let Zlata brush her hair. Lavrenti sat on the floor beside her chair like a boy and did not speak. When they left an hour later, the second wife waved at them from the window as if they were pleasant strangers, and Zlata waved back, and that was the beginning of every Sunday for the rest of their lives. The Dowager Duchess Yevdokia lived 4 more years. She died in her sleep, in the black bedroom she had not left since the winter of the wedding, with her pearls on the table beside her, and no one in the chair by her bed. Zlata was the one who closed her eyes. She did it gently. She had promised the old woman, in that quiet room 11 days into a long cold war, that there would be no scandal, no magistrates, no ruin of the family name. She had kept her word. The Dowager had kept hers. And in the keeping, in the strange long silence between them, something that was not love and not forgiveness, but something harder and more honest had grown. When the old woman was buried, Zlata took the pearls from the table and walked down to the green room and laid them gently at the foot of the portrait of the first wife. "There," she said softly to the painted girl with the secret smile, "he grieved you well, he grieves you still. Sleep now." She did not wear the pearls, not once. They stayed in the green room until the day she died, an old woman herself, surrounded by daughters and granddaughters, and one very tall son, who had his father's river-stone eyes and his mother's steady hands. And in the village, for 100 years after, the women told their daughters a story. There was once a duke, they said, whose mother destroyed every girl he loved. Until one winter night a soldier's daughter walked into the house in wine-soaked shoes, stepped over the broken glass without looking down, and refused, simply refused, to be destroyed. That, the women said, is how you survive a great house. You do not run, you do not break, you stay. And you learn, very quietly, where the old woman keeps her pearls. Many years later, on a soft spring afternoon, Zlata sat by the window of the green room, with her youngest granddaughter at her feet. The child was 8. Her name was Praskovia, after a great aunt she had never met, a thin, pale woman who had lived to be 63 and died with her hand in Zlata's, in a warm bed, in a house with no locked doors. The little girl had her great-aunt's quick eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin, and she was staring up at the portrait above the fireplace with a small frown. "Babushka," she said, "who is that lady?" Zlata looked up. The painted girl with the secret smile looked back, as she had for 60 years now, unchanged. "That is the first Duchess of this house. Was she kind? She never had the chance to be anything, little one. She died very young. Was she sad? I do not think so. I think she was hopeful. Sometimes that is the same thing, and sometimes it is not." The child considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can manage. Then she pointed at the small table beneath the portrait, where a single string of pearls lay coiled on a square of dark velvet, as it had lain since the morning the Dowager Duchess Yevdokia was buried. "And those?" Zlata smiled. It was a small smile, almost private, the kind a painter might have caught if he had been quick enough. "Those are a story for when you are older." "How much older?" "Old enough to know that some things in a house are not for wearing, my love. They are only for remembering." The child accepted this the way children do, half satisfied, half storing the question away for later. She climbed up into her grandmother's lap and laid her small head against Zlata's shoulder, and was asleep within a few minutes, the way only the very young and the very loved ever sleep. Zlata held her for a long time. She thought about the girl she had been on the night the carriage brought her here, the girl with mud on her hem and a silver knife in her sleeve, and a sister coughing in a cold bed 100 miles away. She thought about the corridor and the candle and the broken man at the end of it. She thought about a cup that smelled of almonds, and a cottage behind a chapel, and a Sunday afternoon, hundreds of Sunday afternoons, brushing a forgetful woman's hair by a fire. She had not been the girl in the portrait. She had not been hopeful. She had been something quieter and harder, and in the end, more useful. She had been the one who stayed. The Duke Lavrenti had died the winter before, peacefully, in the chair by her bed. His last words had been her name, said twice, the second time like a question he already knew the answer to. She had answered him anyway. "Yes, my love, I am here. I am still here." She had been there at the beginning of him, and she had been there at the end, and that, she had decided long ago, was the only kind of love story she had ever wanted to live in. She kissed the top of her granddaughter's head. There was one more thing, of course. There was always one more thing in a house like this. In the drawer of her writing desk, beneath a folded square of linen, the small silver knife still lay. She had never thrown it away. She had never told anyone where it came from, or who had left it on her desk, that first long night. She had her suspicions. She had had them for 60 years, but some questions, Zlata had come to believe, were better kept than answered. Some doors were better left exactly as you found them. The Vorontsov house was at peace now. Her granddaughters ran in the gardens. The chapel bell rang only for weddings and Sundays. The cottage behind it had been pulled down a decade ago, and a small orchard planted in its place. And in the spring, the apple blossoms fell on the spot where Tanya had once waved at strangers from a window. Let it be enough, she thought. Let it be enough that the house is kind now. Let it be enough that the girls who walk through its doors walk out again, on their own feet, with their own names. Let it be enough that I stayed. Outside, the first apple blossoms of the season were beginning to fall. And so, my dear viewers, ends the story of Zlata Mirinova, the soldier's daughter who walked into the lion's den in wine-soaked shoes and walked out, 60 years later, a legend whispered by women to their daughters in a little Russian village. But tell me, who do you think left the silver knife on her desk that first night? Was it Akalina, frightened and brave? Was it the Duke himself, begging her without words to save herself? Or was it, perhaps, the Dowager Duchess Yevdokia, who knew, even then, that she had finally met the one girl in the empire she could not break, and wanted, in some small dark corner of her heart, to be defeated at last? I have my answer. I would so love to hear yours in the comments below. If this story moved you even a little, if you smiled, if you cried, if you held your breath for Zlata in that blue room, please, my loves, do not leave without subscribing to the channel. Tap the bell. Share it with the one woman in your life who has ever had to stay and learn and survive a house that did not deserve her. We have many more stories waiting for you, and none of them will be told without you here to listen. Thank you. From the very bottom of my heart, thank you for staying with me to the end. Until the next story, my dear ones, sleep well. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is simply, quietly, refuse to leave.